Welcome to this short video about cannabis oil. So, when we make cannabis oil, what are we actually trying to do? What we want to do is to extract the cannabinoids and terpenes from within the cannabis plant into a solvent. We then evaporate and concentrate that solvent, so we're left with an oil or an extraction high in cannabinoids. To get the best oil, you really need the best ingredients. So the best oil comes from bud, because that has the highest concentration of cannabinoids. Now the plant material itself is just cellulose. It's not of great value to us. What we actually want are the cannabinoids that the cannabis plant produces. Here we have a trichome. These are often referred to on the cannabis plant as resin. And within this structure, this head and here, that's where the cannabis plant produces all its cannabinoids and terpenes. These are the little chemical factories of the plant. And this is what we're trying to extract, the contents from these little structures into our solvent, which will then become concentrated in our oil. So what we have here is 100 grams of dry bud, and today we're going to be making an oil extraction with it. So first thing to do with the bud is to break it up. The more you break the bud up, the more circulation you'll get when you're mixing with the solvent. So what I generally do is just give it a quick mix in a liquidizer. It's important not to fill it too much because you just break up the bits at the bottom then. So do it slowly, do it gradually. And when you're finished, your quick bursts, let it settle for a few seconds so the trichomes, the small glandular structures we saw earlier, can settle. And what we're going to do then is transfer them from here into this beaker. What we're trying to achieve here is to break the bud up into small components, but we're not looking to grind it to a powder, we're looking to break it up. So that's why I do it in small bursts and a small handful at a time. That way you get an even breakup, but you don't grind it to a powder. So here we have our 100 grams of ground up bud. I've taken out some of the larger stems, and we're now ready to add our solvent. Right, so we have our dried ground up bud in here, which we need to add a solvent to now. When it comes to solvent, there's a lot of choice. Depends on jurisdiction where you are in the world, what's available, and also down to your own personal preference. So I don't actually recommend one solvent over another. That's a choice for the person who's making the oil. However, in my medical cannabis guidebook, available on Amazon, I do discuss the pros and cons of the most popular solvents. Ethanol, isopropyl, hexane, they're all discussed in there, pros and cons. Please do your own research when it comes to solvent. Pick one that you're happy with, and whichever solvent you use, the process from now on is the same. So today I'm using alcohol. So what we need to do is add enough alcohol in here to extract the cannabinoids from the trichomes contained in the plant material. So here we go. Approximately 1.5 litres of solvent are used for each 100 grams of dry plant material. So this is our container now with our solvents in and our plant material. What I'm going to do, just so we don't waste any, I'm going to put some solvents in here. So that we can make sure that we extract the maximum from the plant material. Here we have our container with our solvent and our plant material. In the base of the container here, this beaker, there is a magnetic stirrer bar. That's spinning and that's driven by a magnet which is in the base of the hot plate. This is a magnetic hot plate stirrer, so you can apply heat and you can stir at the same time. Because we're extracting cannabinoids in here, we have the heat set to 0 and we have the speed of the rotation set at a suitable speed so we get a good movement of plant material within the liquid. This will ensure that we get a good extraction. So heat to 0 at this stage, appropriate speed. And the other important thing to consider when you're using solvents, certainly when you're evaporating them, is it has to be done in a well ventilated area. So either do it outside or have adequate ventilation. So we'll leave this spinning for around about 10-15 minutes and then we'll filter it and go on to the next stage. Okay, so that's been going now for about 20 minutes. The length of time that you mix your plant material in your solvent, again, is down to personal choice. I think 15-20 minutes gives a good balance, certainly if you're making an oil to treat cancer. So we have our liquid here. What we need to do now is to strain it. So the straining we do in a couple of stages. First stage is just to strain in through a normal mesh filter. This will get out the bigger pieces of plant material. So we carefully put our solution in there. Second stage of the filtration is to filter out the smaller particles of plant material. So we do that by using coffee filters. As you can see from this liquid, it's quite green at the moment because of the chlorophyll that we've also extracted, but we'll remove that shortly. Press as much liquid as you can out with the back of a spoon. So that's the magnetic stirrer bar that we had in. It's very important to filter so that we take out all the plant material, so we're just left with the solvent, which obviously contains the dissolved cannabinoids and terpenes. Okay, so what we have here is our plant material that we've just extracted from. So it's now inert. We're going to throw this away because we've taken everything we want out of it. We've extracted all the cannabinoids and terpenes that we need. So this is now inert, it's just plant material. So we've filtered our extraction. We're now left with a little bit of a green looking liquid. That's mainly because of the chlorophyll that we've extracted along with the cannabinoids and terpenes we want. So I'm going to show you an easy method to remove the green colour from your oil. We'll do that in a minute. These are the filter papers that we used for the final extraction, and as you can see from here, these are mainly small bits of plant matter and empty trichomes, which we have extracted the cannabinoids and terpenes from within. So again, these just go in the bin. And what we'll do now, to get rid of the chlorophyll, we take this outside and we let nature do the job for us. So we can see here, it's quite green in colour, that's because of the chlorophyll. The sun will now start to take that away. So we'll leave this, we'll come back to it in a short while, and we'll see that green colour has gone and it'll turn more amber. Okay, so now these have been out in the sun for about an hour. It's lost the green colour, chlorophyll's gone. I like to do this stage because I don't like chlorophyll in the oil. I don't think it looks right being green. And if you want chlorophyll in your diet, well, eat a lettuce. So the next stage, what we need to do now is reduce the volume and concentrate the cannabinoids and terpenes that we have in this solution, and we do that through evaporation. Again, you've probably seen this in videos before, and this is the stage where people usually put the oil in a rice cooker and they boil it off outside and they're left with a very concentrated thick oil. Personally, I don't use rice cookers anymore. What I use is a still, because a still enables me to recapture most of my solvent, and I think it's a cleaner way of doing it. So what we need to do now is transfer the solution into the still, and you can see there with the colour, it's not green anymore, it's more golden in colour. So now we have our liquid here in the still. Case of pop the top on, connect it up, and what will happen in here, the liquid will be heated, that will then evaporate. Up here in the lid there's a fan, and the vapor will be condensed, and then the solvent will be returned to this vessel here, which means I can reuse it. And as I said previously, it's important to have good ventilation, so either do all this outside or do it in a well ventilated place. This will probably take around about 15 minutes to an hour because there's only a couple of litres in here. If it was full, it'd take about an hour and a half. Obviously, depending on the volumes you're doing affects the time periods. The bigger the volumes, the longer it takes. Okay, so this is now turned off. There's a thermostat inside, so as the levels drop, temperature increases and then it shuts off. So we've recovered probably 2/3 of the solvent that we used. So that can be reused, or we can use that indeed for cleaning or sterilization. So inside the still now, we're left with a thick liquid, which we need to now do the final purge and decarboxylation process. The rings that are inside, they're ceramic rings, inert, but they help keep the temperature even, and it's much better to have these in your still. Keeps temperature even and keeps things moving. So what we need to do now is transfer the liquid into a beaker. This is for the final purging and decarboxylation of the oil. So we drop a magnetic stirrer bar in there, place it on the hot plate, set the temperature, start it spinning. Ventilation again, important. Something else we need to consider at this stage is the temperature of the liquid in there. So to measure it, we use what's known as a laser thermometer. And we can see from there that the temperature currently is 41.5 degrees centigrade. When that temperature increases to 72 degrees centigrade, the alcohol will start to evaporate and we'll see bubbles forming on the surface of the liquid, and the volume will start to reduce as more and more alcohol is evaporated. And as the volume goes down, the temperature will rise, and we want to hold it around about 106 to 110 degrees centigrade for an hour or two on the hot plate, so we achieve decarboxylation. In treating cancer, it's important to decarboxylate your oil because the form of THC formed on the cannabis plant is THCA. And THCA has a very low affinity for cannabinoid receptors in our body. So we need to convert the THCA into THC to make it effective, and certainly make it effective against cancer. So this is how we do it with heat. When you're smoking a joint and you're smoking plant material, the process of smoking a joint, the heat generated within the paper creates decarboxylation. So that's how we get high when we smoke. If we just ate a bud, it wouldn't have much effect. So this is the equivalent of smoking it in a joint, is the decarboxylation process, converting it from THCA into THC. The temperature has now increased to 52 degrees. The reason I use one of these because I'm interested in the temperature of the liquid, not the temperature that the dial says it should be at. Because obviously any temperature guide is just going to be that, a guide. I want to know exactly what temperature it is. And I don't want my oils getting too hot because terpenes and cannabinoids have their own boiling points. For example, THC evaporates at 157 degrees centigrade. So if you get close to that temperature, or certainly above, you're going to start losing THC from your oil, and that's something that you don't want. So it's important to keep the temperature round about 110 degrees. That will achieve decarboxylation, but it will also ensure that none of the cannabinoids are lost because it doesn't get too hot. And this will probably take a couple of hours, be an hour or so to bring the volume down, but then it needs another hour at around about 110 degrees to convert all the THCA into THC to make it effective against cancer. So now the temperature's increased to the early 70 degrees centigrade. You can see it's boiling. This is the alcohol now has reached boiling point, so it starts to evaporate. This is what's causing the boiling on the surface. And as the alcohol evaporates, this volume will fall and the oil will become more concentrated. So the reason I keep it moving with a magnetic stirrer bar is so that we don't get any hot spots and we don't overheat the oil. So this ensures that we have even temperature distribution throughout the liquid and we get a nice even reduction in volume.
And the temperature's not going to increase for a while?
The temperature is not going to increase much higher until all the alcohol's evaporated, and then when all the alcohol's gone, the temperature will increase, which will then try and hold it around about 106 to 110 degrees centigrade, so we achieve decarboxylation. So as we can see here, the level has dropped quite significantly because obviously the alcohol is being evaporated off, but you can still see bubbles occurring. So obviously there's still alcohol in there, and we'll continue this process until all activity ceases. And currently the temperature is 77 degrees. So we're now at 83 degrees. Previously, the bubbles were larger as the alcohol content was higher. Now, obviously, the alcohol content is falling as time goes on, and the bubbles are getting smaller. But from the fact that we can still see small bubbles appearing, that indicates that obviously there is still alcohol present. So we'll continue this process until all of the bubbles and the action cease. So as we can see, all the activity is stopped. There's no bubbling. The temperature is currently 109 degrees. It's been between 110 and 105 for an hour and a half. So it will be nicely decarboxylated. So what I'm going to do now is remove it from here, suck it up into a syringe, and I'll send the sample off to be tested. So what we're going to do now is suck the oil up into a syringe. First thing is weigh the syringe, and it weighs 6 grams. Ready? So in there we have 15.4 gross. So just need to suck up a little bit more. So we have just under 10 grams of oil in there. Pop a syringe cap on.